I'm Bruce Webb, and this is Push to Talk. Our guest today is Dell Livingston. Dell is retired now, but he was previously my boss here at Airbus Helicopters. I worked for Dell as chief pilot for 14 years, and with only one notable exception, my father, he has been the most influential man in my life. Our relationship started out a bit tenuous, but over time we grew to become strong colleagues and ultimately very close friends. I've learned so much from Dell. Through his actions, I learned the value of loyalty, humbleness, patience, and quiet dignity. For those who may remember the show Boston Legal, my wife still compares Dell and I to Denny and Alan. I see the similarities too, and that comparison makes me smile. I am certainly who I am today in large part because of my relationship with Dell Livingston. In this episode of Push to Talk, we'll speak with Dell about his background flying Dustoff helicopters in the Vietnam War, including a harrowing rescue mission, the result of which sent him home from combat a month early. Then Dell will tell us about his transition into the civil world and the difference in stakes between civil and military flight when it comes to aviation safety. And finally, we'll discuss the role strong leadership plays in passing down knowledge to the future generation of aviators. This is Push to Talk, Episode 8, with Dell Livingston. Welcome to the show, Dell. I'm confident that each listener will be fascinated by your story. Where did your aviation career begin?
Well, Bruce, first let me thank you for inviting me here. Always good to see you and get together with you. I find that in retirement, I just don't know where I had the time to work. So it's good. It's good that I get to see you. So my career started back in the mid-60s, 1960s. I was very interested in aviation. My dad was in the Army Air Force during the war. He was not a pilot, but he learned to fly after the war. And I always wanted to fly. Grew up in Wichita Falls, Texas. Was not at the top of my class in high school. Let me say it that way.
Me either.
But I still had the dream of being an Air Force pilot. At 13, I had joined a Civil Air Patrol, which was based out of the Shepherd Air Force Base. And one time, this must have been when I was about 2 or 3 years into a 15 or so, maybe 16, an Air Force lieutenant came by and said, you and my friend who joined the Army with me, you guys should be helicopter pilots. You know, they take guys right out of high school. And we thought, fly those little bubble whirly birds? No, we want to fly real things. And he said, no, they have very exciting aircraft. They have Cobras and Hueys and Chinooks, and it's quite interesting. So that's how we started. I realized that by the time that I struggled through college, may or may not be able to get into my dream. So we started looking into it. Of course, the Army at this time, this would have been 1966. So we talked, and we actually joined the Army for deferred entry in our senior year in high school. And in 1967, off we went to basic training and the WARWAC, which was the Warrant Officer Rotary Wing training program.
And where did you go? Where was that school at the time?
Mineral Wells, Texas, at Walters Base. My buddy was 17 when we joined. His mother signed for him, but I had to wait until I was 18. Because my mother would sign for me. My dad didn't care, but she refused to. So we were 18 and went out there. Of course, for me, it was very exciting and interesting because it was exactly what I had wanted to do. It was helicopters and not fixed wing, but it didn't matter. And I can still remember my very first flight of the hover and takeoff. I can still feel it. We joined in July of 67, went through basic, and then started in September. Went through the first phase, which from there went to Fort Rucker, went to instrument school, checked out in the Huey, and did all of our tacticals maneuvers. So we graduated August.
How many hours did you fly there?
It was 210 total flight time. The classes were about roughly 200 that were graduated, every 2 weeks. Most then went directly to Vietnam, and my buddy and I ended up going to the Dustoff school, which was AMEDS, Army Aviation
Right.
Training.
In the civil world, we call it helicopter air ambulance.
Yeah, correctly. So we went to Fort Sam Houston to get basic medical training.
That's interesting. So as pilots, you were trained to be a pseudo-medic.
Yeah, a very basic, would it be a very basic EMT of course.
That would have been the end of my career, probably, because
Well,
I don't like blood.
I did not like it at all. But when we got there, it didn't bother me. We had some very fond memories because, again, my buddy and I, we had to do things like do a trach on goats.
Poor goat.
Yeah.
No animals were harmed in this in this training, I'm sure.
Bruce, this was 1968.
It's not funny, but it is. I mean, what we did to learn to do something that could save a human life.
It's acceptable in 1968 is not acceptable today.
Right.
But
of course. That was
then, and this is now.
Sure. And that was a training.
Had to give each other shots. And of course, I let go of my shot once I got it in my buddy's arm. Yeah, but we still stayed friends.
So needless to say, you didn't evolve from the cockpit to the back and become a medic.
No, there's an interesting story about that. So we were assigned what we call Dustoffs, but we're air ambulance units, detachments in Vietnam. I ended up in the most southern Dustoff unit in Vietnam out in the Delta.
So you went in as an aircraft commander? I'm not
So you go in and you fly as basically the co-pilot with someone's experienced. So about 2 months into it, I started to fly some missions solo. They, of course, being the newest guy there, they gave you all of the very interesting assignments like you're going to be the pay officer, which meant that I had to take a Huey up to Saigon and stand in line with my pistol and collect MPCs, military pay currency. You could not use U.S. dollars or U.S. currency there. You had to use the military pay currency and piastres, which was the Vietnamese currency. And so as a pay officer, I had to go up there, collect it. I was there for, 11 months. Normally the tour is 12 months, but we'll get to the reason why I was there 11 months. In those 11 months, 10 days that I did not log flight time.
Wow.
In 6 of those days, I was in R&R in Hawaii.
So 4 days.
4 days,
in
really.
11 months, you didn't fly.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And
I did other things. When you're the new guy, you get other things like the maintenance officer, which meant that when you were off, you're supposed to be supporting, the maintenance crews, give them directions or whatever. But I was a 19-year-old warrant officer right out of high school. So, when I was off, I didn't want to go do that. I wanted to go with the boys and with the other guys and, go to the club. But
sure.
But I had other things to do. So, it was fine. But the flying was good. It was exciting.
How many men? So you flew with yourself, the commander, a pilot, a crew chief, and then a medic or 2 medics?
Medic.
Just one medic?
So there was a crew of 4.
Okay. And then how many people could you get out of a LZ reasonably?
We would put the litters sideways. We normally wouldn't put any more than 2 litters in, but then we could put 4. There were 4 other seats. We put whatever we could. My largest amount was there was an outpost being overrun way in the south. We got in and picked up, let me say, 25 dog tags, Vietnamese. I say dog tags because some of them were not alive or were not
whole.
Complete, whole. But there was quite a few. It was enough that we had that many heads on board, plus our crew of 4 in the Huey. We were able to get them up and then get into the next village or town.
I can't imagine being a medic in the back of that ship. You've got people that are literally not whole people, and you have ambulatory people who are pretty good shape, and then everything in between.
It was quite chaotic back there, quite hectic. And I did try one time. I wanted to see if my training at Fort Sam was worthwhile. So one time I did decide I would jump out of and go in the back.
See if you could help.
And see if, just to, hey, let me do that. I lasted about 30 seconds, and it's like, when you're in your seat cockpit, it's one thing. When you're in the back and it's hot and it smells bad and it's bumpy and it's like, okay. We didn't have the equipment that you would have today. If we could get someone on board the aircraft, our guys are so good that they could keep them alive
to the destination.
Yeah. Most of the guys that we had served tours as combat medics in an infantry unit.
Okay, so they were not rookies at this when they were in the ship.
When they came in, they already had experience. With few exception, the units had a U.S. advisor. So the moment somebody was hit out in the field, they'd call it in because that would be a burden on them to have to stop and wait. And so they would call us in and we would launch. You'd go on starting, let's say at 7 a.m. As first up, and then you would spend all day flying.
Now, the aircraft itself was unarmed. You didn't have any weapons other than your personal weapons on board. Is that right?
That is correct.
So you just have a big red cross on the side.
Yeah,
on the side.
That was the side.
But you did carry weapons. I mean, you had personal.
We had personal weapons,
Yes.
yeah. Initially, they just issued us the 45. We were able to get some M16s, but they were hand-me-downs, so we carried whatever. We had an ATC system. For us, it was called PADI control. But if you got too far south, there was no.
Right.
And we had a crew go down, and they had to sit there and fight off.
A dust-off crew.
A dust-off crew with the weapons. So we got serious about taking things, making sure that if we were shot down, that we could defend ourselves and our patients. We got shot at often when we least expected it. The LZ may not be hot, but then it would turn out that somebody decided to shoot at us.
Right.
It was very quick and in and out. So, we take some hits, but that happened quite often.
And then at about the 11-month mark, you got to go home early.
Right.
So what
So
tell us about that?
I was actually, I think at that time, third up, which meant that I didn't even have to, do anything, just be at the base. And the ops NCO came to me and said, hey, listen, there's a mission that's going to go out. I could send second up, but then you're going to go up anyway. Do you want the mission? And it was an interesting mission because it was to fly out of the west coast of Vietnam to an island. You had to dogleg to keep from flying into Cambodian airspace. Today, I happened to look at it the other day. When I was there, it was just real small villages, huts, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Very little built-up area. We landed on the island to pick up 2 wounded plus their family. We got up and flew out there, flew back, and stopped in a little village called Vitan, because on our way back, they said there's a situation going on. It was in the U Minh forest just south of Vitan. There was 2 companies of Vietnamese Rangers with their American advisors had gotten into an ambush by one of the first NVA battalions that had come down from Cambodia. One Ranger company went in and pretty much got shot up, and the U.S. advisor was wounded. The advisor for the second unit went in with his translator and his radio man, and he also was wounded. So overhead was the Air Force FAC flying an 01 Bird Dog. He was co-located, there was Air Force, he was co-located with these guys out in a small village where they all lived together by an airfield. So they were very close personal friends. And he was really frantic about getting his friends out. So I still had these 2 Vietnamese soldiers and 2 civilians. By then it was close to 4:00. We hadn't eaten anything. And they called and off we went. As I went in there, I watched 6 F-100s, fighter bombers, drop their loads. They were being shot at, coming in and going out. And it's like, it's going to be interesting. So we finally went in. The problem was because they were wounded, we had no way. We knew the area, the size, let's say, of a football stadium. We knew that that's roughly where they were, but not the exact position. So we flew in the first time. Didn't even clear 2,000 feet. We took hits on the aircraft.
Descending down through 2,000 feet?
Yeah, descending out of 2,000 feet.
Okay.
We started taking hits, so we backed off and made sure everything was fine. And we, it's been 50-some years, but sometimes it gets to me, okay?
I'm sure.
So we went in the second time, and we got down into the area, but, we were flying around almost like flying around a circle around a football stadium, trying to see someone, find someone, because normally you would have someone on the ground pop smoke grenade to identify where you're supposed to land. But these guys were wounded and couldn't do it.
Right.
we had to try to find them, and we flew around. This time we took some serious hits, knocked out our radio communication, where I, in the aircraft commander seat, could talk to the outside world, but we couldn't talk to each other unless we just, just talked loudly. Came back up, made sure the systems were still good, and checked the crew. Let me back up and say that the Dustoff detachment has 6 aircraft assigned. Out of those, we had gotten several shot up, and so we had borrowed a crew.
So this was not the people you normally flew with?
No, this was from the unit up in Saigon. So we got their aircraft, but they sent their crew chief and their medic. So we just met that day. And so I couldn't remember which one it was. They got hit. But actually he took a round in his back, but he was wearing what we call the chicken plate. There was ceramic and steel plates, and the crew chief and medic had the plates in the front and the back. So he took it off and showed it to me. He was fine physically, but he showed me where the bullet had gouged in.
Wow.
And so we thought, okay, let's try a third time. And just as we were coming down, I heard a call from on the radio. It was a Cobra gunship, Viper 3-3. I can still remember that, Viper 3-3. And he was alone. He'd been doing something, and he had heard the call that we were having, really hot LZ. He said, just give me a minute, I'll be there. So he came in, and we decided we would go in. And I'm, again, not knowing where we were going, I was just zagging, trying to find something.
Looking.
And he was behind me, and he would be punching off rockets. And I'm thinking, I don't know who's more dangerous here.
Right.
Because I might just fly into one of his rockets.
Sure, absolutely.
But finally, as I was zigzagging down there, the area that they were in was like a rice paddy surrounded by trees. So everybody was kind of buried in the water. And one Vietnamese soldier stood up and raised his hand and waved at me. And I thought, well, that must be it. So I stopped. And the moment I stopped, we took, 47 hits. I think it was what they counted. One of which came through the open door on the right side, above the armored seat that the pilot sat in, and below my flak vest, came up through my shoulder and then impacted my vertebra and stopped, chipped it and stopped. Of course, then things changed altogether. I remember thinking that I was flying, thinking I'd closed my eyes and I was pulled back on a cyclone and I was going to fly backwards. Not having the intercom, I was hollering at the co-pilot, who was Bob Aberley, telling him I was hit. You have the controls. In reality, after we spoke sometime later, he said, no, we were just hovering there, and he looked over at me and he said, you had the strangest look on your face.
I bet you did.
And so he took the aircraft and we flew back. We were about 15 minutes from the U.S. hospital at 29th of Vac. As we flew off, Viper 3-3 said, are you going down? Are you hit? I said, no, I'm hit. So we're boarding the mission. He called in, and as we were returning back to 29th of Vac, then another one of our Dustoffs came out.
Was the person that raised his hand to get your attention, was he a decoy? I mean,
No.
Do you think he was a...
No, he was a Vietnamese soldier.
Yeah.
I think he was probably trying to wave at us, maybe to land and get him out of there.
Yeah.
Because they were decimated. If they raised their heads, most of the guys that were killed all had head wounds, because if they raised their heads, they got shot. I fly off, we land. As they take me out of the stretcher, my commander was Armand Simmons was his name. I remember he was not quite my dad's age. Everybody looked older because I was 20 years old then. I remember his head popped in. He said, how you doing, bud?
It's interesting what we remember, isn't it?
Yeah, little bits and pieces.
So you were awake.
Yes, I stayed awake until the operation when I got hit and we were flying back, it was difficult for them to find out where I was shot. So in the armored seats of the Huey, you have two levers that you can pull and the whole seat rocks back to get the person
the
out.
potential person off the controls.
So they took me out. The last thing I remember before they popped me out was I was looking at the engine. The EGT was pegged.
Right. Didn't matter, did it? As long as it kept turning.
And Viper 33 just followed along with us to escort us all the way back.
It's fascinating. Do you know who was flying Viper 33?
I know now because through the VHPA magazine, there was an obituary, and it shows. Normally, it shows when you were in Vietnam, what unit, and your call sign, and it was the same time period, and the call sign, and the unit that supported us. So I knew it had to be him. I do have his obituary. An interesting story there. Well, after this, when I returned back to the States, and I was an instructor at Fort Walters, I went to the bar at the Holiday Inn, which was one of the biggest, nicest at the time. I was sitting there having a drink, and another pilot came over. I don't know how we got to talking or why, but usually if you don't know each other, hey, yeah, who were you with, and et cetera. And it turns out it was Viper 33, because he said, I know you. I'm the one that escorted that helped you in that.
It's a small,
so I had met him.
World.
Yeah, I'd met him. It is how that goes. Anyway, so they took me out and put me in the back. The aircraft commander carried a little booklet. In it were our codes and our call signs. And there's another pocket that we carried, I think 5 ampules of morphine. So we, as the aircraft commander, distributed those. The medics didn't have that. And I remember my medic saying, sorry, sir, with your wound, I can't give you that. It hadn't been painful initially, then it was pretty painful. But
I wonder why morphine was not called for, but obviously there was a good reason.
Yeah, usually, if you don't, certain wounds, you don't give morphine. And
I'd have given you morphine. I'd probably killed you, but I would have given you morphine.
It was maybe because it hit the neck, and I don't know.
Right.
But that's okay.
It's okay now.
It's
probably
okay now.
So okay
no, it wasn't okay then. But it was painful, but it wasn't horrible.
And you still had use of feeling in all your limbs, and
everything was still good there. So got into the hospital. So after X-ray, then I was operation, and I still have the bullet. The bullet was probably the machine gun was probably about 75 yards away, but the bullet was a short round. We'll call it a short round. That is, maybe it had gotten wet, maybe it was old. It came through because it hadn't hit anything but me, but it's still intact. It was actually an armor-piercing round. You could still see the little black paint on the nose, which indicates armor-piercing. And then they brought me a whole cup of shrapnel and stuff from the aircraft. But that I lost, but the bullet I kept. From there, I stayed there for a week or 10 days. Then went to Saigon for about a week to another operation. And then I went to Japan for 2 weeks for rehabilitation.
So then you came back to the States after Japan?
Yes. Then I came back. I was fortunate, I guess, at that time, if you think about it, 1969. I was shot September 6, 1969. About normal rotation back to the States, you came in, and most of my friends that did that talked about how at the airport, how people were not kind.
Right. Yeah.
Not like it was when we came back from the Gulf War. They were not kind. But being medevac back, we came back from Japan to Alaska to Anchorage. And we landed about, I don't know, between 2 or 4 in the morning. I know it was dark and it was cold. And yet all the officers' wives' auxiliary were there to greet us and thank us and give us, something to eat, something to drink, which was quite impressive.
Right. I think
so. My experience,
human contact is important.
It was considered a typical soldier coming back from Vietnam, how bad it, how sometimes they were
Yeah, they were vilified. They
Yeah.
were
Yes.
shouted at and cursed at, and
Yeah.
right, terrible.
So for me, it was a good experience coming back. They sent you back to the hospital closest to your home. So they sent me back to Fort Walters
Mm-hmm.
at the hospital, the Beach Army Hospital there. So what was interesting was the day that I volunteered for that mission, as I was getting ready to leave, they had handed me my orders that I had received for my next assignment, which was to be in Hunter Stewart, be an instructor, flight instructor there in Savannah at Hunter Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
So when I arrived back at Mineral Wells at Fort Walters for my next assignment, they said, well, once I spent a few days there,
you might as well stay here.
and they were going to get, redo my orders to delay it. And I said, well, can I just not stay here? They said, why not? Which is good because, again, it was close to my home. Fast forward to, then I finally go to university, and then I joined the Dallas Police. And while I was with Dallas Police, I was a patrol officer first, but then the commander of my National Guard unit was the chief pilot, and he needed new pilots. So I spent about a year and a half in the helicopter section, and that's how I got to join Aerospatiale. I was flying the Secret Service for President Ford, former President Ford, out to the Colonial, and Aerospatiale was flying some of the dignitaries. So as we had downtime, I spoke with the chief pilot, and he said, why don't you put in a resume for me? Which I did. Made a decision to leave the police department a little over 5 years in and joined Aerospatiale. That would have been 1980. So from 80 till I retired in 2015, I was with Aerospatiale / Eurocopter and Airbus. I was a pilot, then a senior pilot until 1991. I got activated with the Chinook unit to go to Desert Storm. When I came back, there was an opening to be the manager of aviation safety and accident investigation. Did that until 1997, when I got into being a director of marketing, mainly to introduce all of the new products that we were having. We at the time that I was in, developed about 10 new products. I did that until 2003, when Mark Paganini took over. I then became the director / vice president of flight operations. And that's where I had met Bruce. He probably doesn't realize it, but he spoke so well of his relationship with me, but he didn't realize how successful I was because of him. As he mentioned, we had initially a little difficult problem, only because I came in from the marketing side and then to take over flight operations, and there was some difficulties there.
But we worked through those.
But we worked through those, and I quickly realized that if I was going to be successful, Bruce had to be on my side because he was brilliant in what he was doing, and there was no replacement for him. So we got through and developed our friendship. And so my success was because of Bruce.
I appreciate that. I think we all things happen for a reason.
He mentioned something, about my last flight on the actual aircraft that I took was I was ferrying a Super Puma from LA to Vancouver. And the weather was pretty bad around Portland. And the things that we learned and trained in, this is I guess the important part of this whole conversation is safety related, because we were both involved in safety. You are what you are trained to do, and your mentality for that. So in Vietnam, the mission was the thing. You just went. The weather didn't matter how bad the weather was. We would do things like fly over the clouds, have them pop flares to guide our way down to the ground through cloud layers. It was the mission. You did the mission. The mission orientation was the thing. And much like it happened here initially in the EMS programs, you were told, oh, you've got X number of wounded, serious. And so you personalize with those the people on the ground and their wounds, as opposed to just saying, can you go or not? And so that mentality carried me through. And it's a hard habit to break. And so when Bruce mentioned about that flight, it was like, yeah, I knew it was bad, but that mentality of, I got to, it's still with you even as you get older.
So just to be very clear, so Dell and I ultimately, we're out flying, the weather's bad, we're in VFR helicopters, we're trying to get to our destination, and we do have a mission, and it's a very important thing. And at some point I said, Dell, well, we're stopping. And I don't remember exactly, but there's an airport, 3 miles from here to our west, we're going. And
then when Bruce said that, I realized, good.
We went and we landed, and I remember we're shutting down and you got out of the aircraft, and as you're walking over, I'm thinking, well, I hope Dell isn't upset, but I remember you came and said, thank you. I appreciate you stopping. In our lives, not just flying, but in our lives, it takes, it sounds very cliche, but it takes a community, it takes a team. We've all had instances where we are so focused on something, we don't see the forest for the trees. So I think that's an important thing for all of us to realize is how we behave and respond. Both sides of that coin are important. In other words, it would have been very tempting for you to have said, hey, listen, Bruce, I've been flying 20 years longer than you. And, I felt comfortable we could, go here, do this, do that, fly higher, fly lower, fly slower, fly faster, whatever, with the intention of helping me develop, quote unquote. But what that would have ultimately done was that may have been your words, but what I would have taken from that, probably what any human would take is, I didn't try hard enough, or we didn't try hard enough. But that wasn't a message, a simple thank you. We probably just spent the night there, had a nice steak dinner, had a beer, got up the next day and flew in sunshine onto our destination. I do know this, the world didn't come to an end because we didn't make our destination that day.
Exactly. That's the mentality you have to overcome. You think that this is so important. It's your career, it's your image, it's what you do. You're flying, you've got to get there. And that's a hard mentality to break. I told you a little bit of story about the Super Puma trip. So we're flying in bad weather, and I'm thinking, I'm going up this river. I see wires. I'm nearly 70 years old. What am I doing here? This is not important. Mm-hmm. If I arrive a day late, it doesn't matter. But it finally had to click there for me to say, okay,
we're done.
I'm done. Right. This is it.
Land the aircraft.
This is it. And more than many other pilots, having spent so much time in accident investigation, I've seen the same decisions, same poor decisions, and yet I succumb to it.
Understanding the whys and the how does not indemnify us from making error. We're still human. Yeah, there's so many things that we learn, and hopefully through these conversations, through the videos that we do, through the outreach that I'm allowed to do through Airbus, we can help in our lives. And I'll just speak about mine. My career over 40 years, there were no people 40 years ago doing aviation outreach or safety outreach,
right.
Or safety was, well, just go be safe, which is the most bizarre, unhelpful thing you can tell. Be safe. What does that mean? It has no, you can say, be careful, exercise caution, be reasonable. Those are actions you can take, but how do you be safe? Safety is the outcome of reasonable decisions, careful action. The result should be safety. So hopefully we can help younger people now not make some of the same errors that we've made. And there are pilots that have made errors less egregious than the ones I have made, I'm sure, that are no longer here. You gave me a book a long time ago, Fate is the Hunter. Many things in life are through happenstance, and it's how we receive that information and what we do with it. Do we land after flying in bad weather and say we're really good, or do we say that was silly? And how does that change our future behavior?
In keeping with that thought, I want to digress back to Vietnam, because the forces that act upon you that for you to make your decisions are the good decisions. As an example, I knew it was bad down there. When I saw them shooting at F-100s that were armed and shooting at them, I'm thinking, that's going to be bad. But my decision to go 3 times and put my crew and those 4 Vietnamese in the back in danger was based on the fact that FAC pilot, his friends were down there, and he was crying, begging me to get him out.
Sure.
And what could you do?
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason in our more reasoned environment, not in the military, but in the civil world, we really try to keep those pilots from knowing as little information as possible to help them be at an arm's distance, to be not connected to that. Because as much as we'd like to say, we can make decisions in a vacuum, or we're immune from those things, we're not.
Not at all.
And
Not
clearly,
at all.
it's still, 50 years later, it's still there. I'm a very emotional person. A lot of pilots, they may hide it. I don't really attempt to hide it, but I think that's part of what gives us the ability to do extraordinary things is introspection and the desire to help others. But sometimes that can get us in trouble.
And I think it was, I don't know, well over 50 years ago, I think what started that was, I remember being, obviously, as an Army aviator during the time that the Army decided to really think about safety. It was in the 70s, and it's because of the loss of so many losses we had. Even in Vietnam, you'd say, okay, well, that's war, but yet there were non-battlefield.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Damaged deaths were more because of lack of safety, doing things. And so I remember the pushback that we've had about safety in recent times and how that was back even 50 years ago. You had to push people. Wait a minute, I know what I'm doing, kind of attitude. And to say, no, just think about safety.
Right.
And
it's a paradigm shift. It's absolutely a shift in perspective.
And I see that today when I see people do things, it's like, ooh, unintended consequences of you doing that.
Right. Well, in our example, you and I out flying aircraft, and you were the VP and I was the chief pilot. We need to lead by example. You want the story to be a reasonable one. And quite honestly, you and I are both big believers in, telling people what's happened, be honest with people, learn from what's happened so we can all learn. And I think any leader who hides their humanity or hides their error is doomed to fail. As a leader, you must be the first one to stand up and say, here's an error I made. Confess it. Because you can't expect your subordinates to confess error, or not even an error. Maybe it was a good decision that went awry, but it's hard to swallow that sometimes, especially when you're talking about a high dollar, business like we're in. But that comes from the top. Too often, I fear there are people in our business who still today are reticent to speak the truth. I was very proud. I was speaking at a university a few weeks ago. At the end of presentation, I said, listen, just be aware. These were young aviators. I said, all you have is your reputation. All you have is who you are. And I said, never do anything to besmirch your reputation. Be honest, be forthright. The right thing to do is always the right thing to do. And so, that was me on my soapbox, and class was dismissed and everyone left. About 10 minutes later, a young man came back into the classroom to speak to the instructor about something that he had done that now he realized he shouldn't have done, and he was coming back to confess. And it really made me feel good that he looked at me and said, it's because of what you said that I realized I just got to be honest. Events like that, they're not directly a safety thing in a way, but they are. Yeah, that reinvigorates me and makes me want to continue to do what I do. And I am so proud of Airbus. What I do, what you allowed me to do. I remember when I can still remember. In fact, you and I, when my position was approved for me to do what I'm doing today, you and I were in probably Bogota, Colombia with a 225 or a 332, a 215, whatever, a big helicopter. And you questioned whether that was the right move for me. I can remember that because you cared for me. I'm so happy and proud that Airbus would allow me to do that, because really it was just, I believe that our current president, Romain, he was the CFO at the time. And I remember Ramah talked to me about that too. And Ramah said, Bruce, are you sure this is what you want to do? Just like you did. And I said, I think it is. I'd been chief pilot at the time for 16 years. And I said, Airbus needs a change. And not because I felt like I wasn't doing a good job. I felt like I was. But I believe that change is good. Change scares people, but it's good. I, with Airbus's support, shifted my focus, and now this is what I do. Certainly, Airbus has demonstrated and continues to demonstrate that this is important. I really do think we have a strong commitment to safety. We understand that the human element is still the most difficult to tackle, and it takes continued effort to tackle that. And it's part of the reason that we want to do what we're doing here. There are a lot of things, lessons learned, that you can't learn in a week, a month, a year, or 10 years. Sometimes it takes decades. And so, it's our hope is to take decades of experience, enjoy the conversation, enjoy the camaraderie, but also take away lessons learned. And, when you were talking about, the third time into that LZ and, these F-100s getting shot at, and it made me think I had flown with a gentleman in Nebraska, Lyle Stolman is his name, great guy. And he flew a gunship, the one they had in Vietnam that had a howitzer in it. And I forget what kind of airplane that was, but it had a howitzer mounted in it. They could shoot the ground.
Puffed the Magic Dragon, which was a C-47.
Okay. Yeah.
Then they went to Shadow, which was a C-119, and then they got the C-130s.
Okay. So he flew one of those kind of things.
Which they still use today.
And I remember him telling me, we were just chatting one day, we were flying medical helicopters. I was flying a medical helicopter. He's flying a medical airplane. But he was a helicopter pilot as well. He said their protocol was they could only orbit the target once. That was their protocol. You rolled in on it, you made a 360-degree turn around it, and you never circled it twice. Never. He said the only time he ever circled one twice, he got shot and bad. So there are policies and procedures in place, and there are a lot of smart people that know why. And, in your situation, especially as a very young aviator, even though a lot of experience, still young, and something else you mentioned that's important, you hadn't eaten all day. We don't make good decisions. And I'm not saying your decision to go in was the wrong decision. It's impacted by so many things. And chief among them was the emotional desire to, when someone is pleading for their lives, or honestly, I think someone pleading for someone else's life is almost more impactful than someone pleading for their own life. It is very difficult to not let that affect your decisions. But it's even more so when you're fatigued, hungry, right? All that mounts up. Do you know, Dell, were the people saved, not saved? Do you have any idea?
The initial American advisor was killed. He was probably killed instantly. The second advisor was wounded. Right. And I met him at the hospital. He came to visit me in the hospital.
I like to think, because I've, in my career had the occasion to turn down many flights that I think, the right thing to do is turn it down. And I did. Doesn't mean it doesn't bother me.
Yes.
And so even though you didn't turn it down, it still bothers you. You didn't successfully do it. But we're human. And I hope we always, have that humanity, because that's what is important in life. We have to temper it with reasonableness. And especially, I've given presentations where people say, yeah, Bruce, but you just got to go. You just got to go. And I say, I guess if the world's going to end if you don't go, because, there's a despot with a nuclear weapon, and if you don't go, it's going to blow up the world. Okay. That's not the case in most of this.
No. You still have those, the way you were trained and brought up. And that's very true in aviation. It still stays with you. You have to make a conscious effort to say, I want to do this, but it's not the right thing to do.
Right. Well, I think.
And that's.
Yeah, because it's an emotion. We cannot control our emotions. It's impossible. Your emotion is what you feel. We can only control our response or our actions.
Yeah.
You know, I like to say we should always do a pre-mortem on a flight. You know, if we have a flight and we discuss what's likely going to be the thing that causes an accident, and we can put something in place to ameliorate or mitigate that opportunity for that to occur, then we can then choose if we're going to do it or not. Did we reduce the opportunity for risk enough or not? And it only takes a few seconds, or a couple of minutes at most. But again, that's not human nature. Human nature is to go. We'll figure it out. As you and I both know, a cockpit's not a great place to make good decisions. It's a place where, you know, emotion and visceral things impact us.
Especially in our line of work with the helicopter, you're single pilot. You don't have someone else there.
Right.
To say,
absolutely.
You know, enough.
Which is one of the arguments people make, and I think it's a salient argument. I'm not sure it overrides the other arguments, but, you know, people will say, yeah, we need to go two pilot. You know, when we're flying, we need two pilots. And of course, you know, those of us that grew up in this industry, flying aircraft with one pilot, we're like, well, I'd rather have 200 pounds of fuel than 200 pounds of co-pilot. But there's more than that, right? It does give you the opportunity to help train a young aviator. It is one of the difficulties in our business is that when you first started flying, even though you're a qualified pilot, you flew with a more senior person, and you took advantage of their knowledge and guidance before then you took control of the aircraft commander. You became the aircraft commander. And in the fixed wing world, that's how it happens typically, right? But in the helicopter world, that has not happened. So there certainly are benefits beyond just the immediate benefit of having two minds in the cockpit to discuss, to help resolve an issue. But the secondary or at least tertiary benefit is, you can train others. You can help guide others. I think at the end of the day, if we can just all commit to be a little more introspective. Well, I do want to thank you, Dell. You know, your time is valuable, and I am so honored that you would come. You know, you've helped me in my career, and I believe listeners will garner some small tidbits of knowledge that will help them in their career. That's now what our responsibility is. That's what you can do for the industry is to, you know, there's going to be no epiphanies in this world, right? We're just all going to wake up one day and say, oh, I know how to solve this problem. But it's those small little tidbits. And if we can just, you know, nurture those tidbits, let them grow, hopefully we'll stop younger aviators from suffering accidents and incidents. So once again, I'm so happy you were here.
Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me.
We've reached our clearance limit. So until next time, resume own navigation.
The information provided during this podcast, Push to Talk with Bruce Webb, is made available for general information and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Airbus Helicopters, Inc. or its affiliates.